continuing with Perek Tesvav of Sefer Yehoshua. I need to warn everybody, if you haven't discovered this yourself, that the next few parakim are lists of places and boundaries of all the Shvatim. Each Shevet had its own miyuchadika chelek in Eretz Yisrael, and these are defined both in terms of the north, south, east, west ends of those chalakim, as well as the important cities that are in the middle. But the problem is, as you would imagine, that we don't have precise identification for a lot of these cities and a lot of the boundaries. So there are many, many different shitais in the Meforshim, and there are many different ways that the maps are drawn. So much of what we say will unfortunately have to remain unclear until Mashiach comes, and then we will see the Chalukas Haaretz. Of course, I have to add that even when Mashiach comes, it's Lav Dafka, we're going to follow the Chalukah of Yehoshua, because in the book of Yecheskel, which Amir Tashem will get to, there is a different Chalukas Haaretz, which is not what we're going to talk about today. But this is after the 7 years of conquest. There will now be the division of Eretz Yisrael, and Perek Tesvav deals exclusively with the chelek that was given to Shevet Yehuda. Now, the basic contours of the chelek of Shevet Yehuda is fairly simple. Yehuda gets the entire southern section of Eretz Yisrael, and if you look at a map, you can see from the northern tip of the Dead Sea, the Yam HaMelech, until the southern boundary of the land, which borders the land of Edom, the land of Esav, to the south. So the north-south continuum is from the top of the Yam HaMelech, the north of the Yam HaMelech, all the way to the southern boundary, and east-west it goes from the Yam HaMelech all the way to the Mediterranean. So the whole reichav, the whole width of the land in that southern section belongs to the tribe of Yehuda. We will see that Yehuda's boundary goes as far north as part of Yerushalayim. Yerushalayim itself is split between Yehuda and Binyamin, and even the Beis HaMikdash itself will be split. Part of it will be B'chelkai Shel Yehuda, part of it will be B'chelkai Shel Binyamin. Right, so that's the basic idea of the chelek of Yehuda. So now we go into the details. Vahi HaGoral Mateh B'nei Yehuda L'Mishpachosam, the lot that fell to the Bnei Yehuda according to their various families. El Gavul Edom Midbar Tzin Negba Miktzei Teiman. At the south, the chelek of Yehuda begins at the boundary of the nation of Edom. These are the Bnei Esav in the desert of Tzin. Vayilem Gavul Negev, and therefore their southern boundary runs Miktzei Yam HaMelech, from the southern tip of the Dead Sea, Min Halashon Hapona Negma. Again, if you look at a picture of the Dead Sea, you will see that you have the main Dead Sea, the Yam HaMelech, and then there's kind of a tongue that protrudes southward, and Yehuda's southern boundary is from the southern tip of that prong, that Lashon, which is dipping down to the south. Interestingly enough, that Lashon is actually east of the Jordan River. I mean, the Jordan River ends at the Dead Sea, but this is further east than the Jordan River itself. So this is the only part of the main body of Eretz Yisrael that technically is further east than the Jordan River itself. Right? So we've identified the southernmost point. V'yetzei el minegev l'maleh akravim v'avar tzina v'ala minegev l'kadesh barnea. So these are the points along the southern boundary. It goes to Maleh Akrabim. Again, this is going east-west along a southern boundary. It passes by Tzin. It then climbs an elevation. This is describing mountainous, going south of Kadesh Barnea. So Kadesh Barnea, we know, is very, very important. This was the place from which the Meraglim were sent. Again, the pasuk is a little different, a little difficult, because this implies that Kadesh Barnea is within the boundary of Yehuda. Now, this is not an Ian Shir, so I can't go into everything, but one has to have a question, because if the Meraglim were sent from Kadesh Barnea, that implies they had not yet entered Eretz Yisrael, And yet here we see that the boundary of Yehuda went south, the southern boundary of Yehuda went south of Kadesh Barnea, implying that Kadesh Barnea is within the Gevul. V'yavar Chetzron, the boundary then passes through Chetzron. Again, we are going west. V'ola Adara, it goes up. This just refers to, again, the word Allah in these psukim does not refer to going north, as you might think in conventional maps. We are going due west. We're at the southern boundary going west, and Allah and Yored literally just means going up a mountain, down a mountain. So it goes up the Mount of Adar, V'nasav HaKarka, then it goes down to Karka. Again, we are going west. Avar Atzmona, V'yatsa Nachal Mitzrayim. And the boundary ends at what is called Nachal Mitzrayim. Now there is a big machlokas. Nachal Mitzrayim is given as the southern boundary of Eretz Yisrael in the Torah itself. Some say Nachal Mitzrayim is the Nile, so it goes all the way to the Nile. Others say it's the Wadi El Arish, the El Arish Wadi, which is on the Sinai Peninsula. Whatever it means in Parshas Masai is what it means here. Vayu Totzos HaGvul Yama. Once we hit Nachal Mitzrayim, we then just go due north to the Mediterranean coast, and that is the southern boundary. It curves upward, curves north to hit the Mediterranean coast. That is the southern boundary of Yehuda. Gevul Kedma, what is the eastern boundary? So here we're going to sketch an eastern boundary going north, going south to north. So Gevul Kedma Yam HaMelech Ad Kitzei HaYarden. So the northern part of the east is the tip of the Yam HaMelech, right where it joins the Jordan River, which flows into the Yam HaMelech, and that will give you the eastern. So the eastern boundary essentially is simply the entire length of the Yam HaMelech from its southern protrusion all the way to its northern tip. So we have the eastern boundary, we have the southern boundary, we've given the western boundary. Now we're going to describe the northern boundary, Ugavul Lepas Tzafona Milashon Hayam, from the northern tip of the Yam HaMelech, Mitzay Yarden, where it joins the Jordan River, V'Allah HaGavul, and then there are mountains and valleys. The boundary goes up to a high point called Beis Chogla, Avar Mitzvon LeBeit HaArava. It goes north of a town called Beis HaArava, Allah HaGavul, Even Bohan Ben Ruvain, and the Gavul going, again, we're going, if it's a northern boundary, you understand, we are going east to west, right? The northern boundary is in an east-west line, and it climbs up a hill that's by the curious name Bohan Ben Reuven. He's not Reuven the Shevet, but a person who is Ben Reuven, who somehow was known to be involved in that piece of land. The Allah HaGavul Devira Me'emek Achar. The Gavul then climbs to the city of Devir from the Emek of Achar. Utzvona Pona Ela Gilgal. And then it turns towards Gilgal. This is a different Gilgal. This is not the Gilgal by the Yarden, where the Jewish people are encamping. Asher Nochach L'Mala Adumim, that takes us to Mala Adumim. Asher Minegev L'Nachal. And then the boundary goes south of a certain river, meaning whatever that Nachal is, the northern boundary is south of it, so the Nachal is not part of Yehuda. The Avar HaGvul El Mei Ein Shemesh. The Gavul then goes to a certain stream or spring, which is called Ein Shemesh. Vayu Totza Osav, and it continues to another spring that is called Ein Rogel, which was a common place where they did laundry and washing. The Targum says Rogel is a mechabes, one who washes clothing by trampling on it. The Allah HaGavul, again, this is the northern boundary, and the boundary is going north to the valley of Gei Ben Hinnom. Again, we know that the valley of Ben Hinnom is one of the valleys of Yerushalayim, south of Jerusalem. The name Gehenna, as the place for Rishayim, has been associated with that valley because in the course of time, that valley became a great place of idolatry and tumah and sin. But here, there is no negative connotation. It's simply saying that the northern boundary of Yehuda goes through Gei Ben Hinnom, which is essentially South Jerusalem, right? So you're starting from the Dead Sea and you're going slightly north. El Kesef HaYevusi Minegev, and it goes south of the inhabitants of the Yevusi, that were the nations that lived in Yerushalayim, Yerushalayim, V'yola HaGvul El Rosh HaHor Asher B'nei Gen Hinnom Yama, and then continuing, going west along the northern boundary line, it then goes up the mountains that are at the end of the valley of Rephaim, which is another valley of Yerushalayim Safona. V'toar HaGvul Merosh HaHor El Mayan Mein Avtoach. The Gevul then goes to another spring that is called Mein Avtoach. V'yatsa El Orei HaRefron, and it links up with the cities or the towns in the mountains of Ephron. Now, this is not Ephron who lived in Hebron. This was another Ephron, another Canaanite leader. V'toar HaGvul Ba'ala Hi Kiryat Ya'arim, and the boundary continues by a town that was known as Kiryat Ya'arim. If you know Yerushalayim, this is what we call modern-day Telstone. V'nasav HaGvul Mibala Yama El Har Seir, and then the Gevul continues going west to Mount Seir. Again, the Meforshim point out, this is not the Mount Seir of Esav, because the Mount Seir of Esav is south of the Dead Sea. Here, we are traveling north of the Dead Sea. So part of what's so confusing here is that you have places that have the same name. This is a totally different and otherwise unknown Mount Seir, V'yavar El Kesef Har Yarim Mitzafona, and it goes north of a place Kisalon, V'yarad Beit Shemesh, and then it goes down to hit the town of Beit Shemesh. V'yavar Timnah, it passes Timnah, and this is already taking us closer and closer to the Mediterranean coast. So the northern boundary is going to hit the Mediterranean coast. V'yatza HaGvul, to the city of Ekron, a Philistine city to the north. V'tor HaGvul Shikrona, V'avar Harabala, V'yatza Yavneel, V'yu Totza'av HaGvul Yama, U'Gvul Yam HaYama HaGadol, U'Gvul Zeh, Gvul Ben Yehuda, Saviv L'Mishpachosam. Again, I do apologize how difficult it is to fully understand all of these cities, but again, what we are given is, we are given the Chelek of Yehuda that starts at the southern boundary of Eretz Yisrael, which starts at the southern extension of the Yam HaMelech, and it goes north to the top of the Yam HaMelech, but then, as the Gevul progresses, it goes north of that point as it travels west, so it encompasses Gei Ben Hinnom, the valley of Ben Hinnom, Chalakim of southern Yerushalayim, which is described as the city of the Yevusi, Kiryat Ya'arim, Beit Shemesh, and it continues to the Mediterranean coast. So in effect, the northern boundary of Yehuda is somewhat north of the Yam HaMelech. The southern boundary is coextensive with the Yam HaMelech, and in terms of east-west, it goes from the Yam HaMelech all the way to the Mediterranean coast. This is a very large chelik of land, and this was the land that was given to Eretz Yehuda. Now, it then mentions a fact that we know before, that although all of this land was divided among the families of Yehuda, there was a certain private disposition that was given to Kalev ben Yefuneh. Kalev ben Yefuneh, Nasan Chelek B'toch B'nei Yehuda Al Pi Hashem LeYoshua. Kalev ben Yefuneh got his own private Chelek, based on what Hashem said to Yehoshua, Kiryat Arba. That Kalev was given the place that is called Kiryat Arba. Kiryat Arba is Hebron. Now the Pasuk says the reason why the original name of Hebron was Kiryat Arba is a person, Avi Ha'anak, who was the father of 3 fearsome giants. Achiman, Sheshai, and Talmai, and therefore this was the city of Arba, meaning he was the father of those giants. Arba was just his name. Chazal darshan that Kiryat Arba is also a reference to Ma'arat HaMachpelah, which is in Hebron, that had the four righteous pairs, Adam and Chava, Avraham and Sarah, Yitzchak and Rivka, Yaakov and Leah. But in this pasuk it says, Arba is Avi HaAnak, the father of the giants, which is not in the city, is now called Hebron, and this was given to Kalev as a reward for his praying in Hebron, not to be nichshal in the Chet of the Meraglim, which was 45 years earlier. Yoresh Misham Kalev, and eventually Kalev, because Hebron was not totally conquered by Am Yisrael. If you remember, Kalev offered to take Hebron because he said that he would be Megaresh, the Anokim, even though he was 85, and the pasuk says he did it. And it's interesting that this is an example of Ein Muktam Umu'uchar, because in fact he did not do this in the lifetime of Yehoshua. Kalev lived longer than Yehoshua, and Kalev actually did this in the lifetime of the Shoftim after Yehoshua, but here it does record ahead of time that Kalev expelled the three giants, Sheshai, Achiman, Talmai, Yelidei HaAnak, who were the children of the Anak, of the giant Arba. And then we have another story, part 2 of the Kalev story, which again happened after Yoshua's death. V'yal misham el Yoshvei Devir. And Kalev then turned to another city in the Chelik of Yehuda that had not yet been conquered by Am Yisrael, and this is Devir. And Devir also had an old name, Kiryat Sefer. Again, not necessarily the Kiryat Sefer of modern Israel. Vayomer Kalev, and Kalev offered a reward. Asher Yaked Kiryat Sefer L'chada, anyone who can conquer Kiryat Sefer and smite the inhabitants, Nosati lo es Achsa biti leisha, I will give him Achsa, my daughter, for a wife. And we are told that somebody stepped forward, Vayilkada Osniel ben Kenaz, Achi Kalev, and Osniel ben Kenaz, the brother of Kalev, conquered it, and indeed, Kalev kept his promise, Yitein lo es Achsa bito leisha. Now the Gemara asks the obvious kasha, how could Osniel ben Kenaz be Kalev's brother? Kalev is called Ben Yefuneh, and Osniel's father was Kenaz, so Kenaz and Yefuneh are two different people. So the Gemara explains that Kalev and Osniel were half-brothers from the same mother, that the mother was first married to Yefuneh, gave birth to Kalev. Yefuneh died. She then married Kenaz, gave birth to Osniel. Osniel and Kalev are therefore half-brothers with the same mother. Now, there is no problem with Osniel marrying Kalev's daughter, because the halacha is an uncle is allowed to marry a niece. Even though a nephew cannot marry an aunt, an uncle can marry a niece. So even if Osniel would have been Kalev's full brother, it would have been allowed. Osniel ben Kenaz is also very significant, because interestingly enough, he is the shofet who took over after Yehoshua. Osniel ben Kenaz is the very first of the Shoftim in the book of Shoftim. The Gemara in Tzemura says that this story has much more to it than the surface. It says when Moshe Rabbeinu died, there were 300 halachos that were forgotten. And the Sefer, as it were, the Sefer Torah was missing. And when Kalev says, he who can conquer Kiryat Sefer, I will give him my daughter, he doesn't just mean military prowess, but he means if anybody can restore through pilpul and chiddush all of the halachas that we don't know, he will deserve my daughter in the merit of Torah. And the greatness of Osniel ben Kenaz was he was machzir the 300 forgotten halachas to the kayach of pilpul, and that's what it means to say when Osniel ben Kenaz conquered Kiryat Sefer. Now then, there's a part 2 to this story, that after Osniel married Achsa, Kalev's daughter, made a request of her father, Vayhi b'vaya, when she came to her father, Vatisiseyu lishol mi'esavi asada. She wanted to ask her father to give them a wedding present, give them a field. But titznach mi'ala chamor, she fell off the donkey as if she's begging. Vayomer la kalev malach, what's going on? Vatomer, and she said, Tanali bracha, give me a blessing. Eretz hanegev nasatani, the land that I have is desert land. V'nasatali gulos mayim, give us land that has springs of water. And the pasuk says, Kalev gave them a wedding present. Vayitein la esgulot iliot, upper springs from a higher elevation, and gulot tachtiot, and springs from a lower elevation. Again, the Gemara in Tamura basically says that she was asking for a blessing for Torah knowledge, that her husband should continue to be very, very great in Torah, and essentially the blessing of the springs is also a remez to Torah being compared to water. So we now have the boundaries of the tribe of Yehuda, and we have the special private bequest that was given to Kalev, which is Kiryas Arba Chevron, and then the unique conquest of Asniel ben Kenaz, who married Kalev's daughter, in which he conquered Devir, which was called Kiryat Sefer. So the rest of the parak is simply a listing of many, many cities that are in the Chelek of Yehuda. We're not even told where they are, but in this big territory of Yehuda, we have many types of cities. And what's interesting is that the cities are classified based on their geographical region. The first is the Negev, right? The Negev, as it is today, is that big southern desert stretch, and there were a lot of cities in the Negev. Vahi harim miksei lamate b'nei Yehuda, El Gavul Edom, towards the Edomite border in the south, Negba in the Negev, Kavseel, Eder, Yagor, Kina, Dimona, Edada, Kedesh, v'chatzor v'yisnan, Zif, Vatelem, Ubalos, v'chatzor, Chadata, Ukriot, Chatzron, hi chatzor, Amam, Ushma, Umolada, v'chatzar Gaida, v'chashmon, Ubeis Pelet, v'chatzar Shual, Uber Sheva, Ubiz Yosia, Bala, v'iyim, these are just names, v'yel Tolad, Uchsil, v'chorma, v'tziklag, umadmena, v'sansana, Levaot v'shilchim ayin v'rimon. So these are cities in the Negev, and what it tells me is I only have one comment here, Kol arim esrim v'teisha v'chatzreim. There are a total of 29 cities in the Negev. So my one comment is, I'm sure you have been counting this as I'm going along, just a joke. There's actually 38 cities that are listed. So why does it say there are 29 cities? So Rashi makes the very, very important point that we're going to read weiter on that the tribe of Shimon did not have its own chelek in Eretz Yisrael. Rather, Shimon was given cities that are muvla within the boundary of Yehuda. And we're going to read further on that Shimon had 9 cities in the chelek of Yehuda. So consequently, it's very, very good. There were a total of 38 cities. 9 of those cities, however, are going to be given to Shimon, and therefore 29 of those cities were kept by the tribe of Yehuda. So this is the first grouping of the cities. These are the cities of Negev. Now the second grouping of the cities are the cities of the Shephelah. Shephelah is the lowlands and valleys that are north of the Negev area. And here it mentions Eshtaol, Sarah, Oshna, Zanoach, Ein Ganim, Tapuach, Vohainam, Yarmut v'Adulam, Socha v'Azeka, V'Sharayim v'Adisayim, v'Hagederu v'Gederosayim, Orim, Arba, Esrei v'Chatzrayim, 14 cities. Then it goes on though. Apparently these are different regions within the Shvela. Sanan v'Chadashan Migdal Gad, Dilan Mitzpah Yoksael, Lachish u'Batzkas v'Yaglon, v'Chabon v'Lachmam v'Chaslish, u'Kedeiros Beis Dogon, Naama u'Makeda, Arim Sheish Esrei v'Chatzreim. So far we've mentioned 30 cities of the Shvela, but then we have a third region. So apparently the Shvela is divided into regions. Livna, Esrer v'Yashan, Yiftach v'Yashna, u'Nitziv, u'Ke'ilah v'Yachsiv, Reisha, Arim Teisha v'chatzreihem. That's 9, so it's 39 in the Shvela. And now we get into the Mediterranean coast, which, although is given to Yehuda, the Philistines were still not dispossessed. Ekron, ubenoseh v'chatzreha, Ekron, as well as the suburbs and the open fields. Ekron v'yama, and then Ekron along the Mediterranean coast, which brings you Asher al Yad Ashdod v'chatzreihem. Ashdod benoseh v'chatzreha. Benoseh, her daughters, means the suburbs. Chatzerah means the open courtyards outside of the city. Aza ubenoseh v'chatzerah ad Nach Mitzrayim, all the way to the Nile or the Vadi al Arish. V'hayam hagavol ugavol, all the way to the Mediterranean. Again, these are the Philistine cities that belong to the Shvela, the Mediterranean lowlands, but were not fully conquered, even though they were allocated to the Chelek of Yehuda. So we went through the Negev cities, the Shvela cities, and then we have the mountainous areas that had cities. Shamir, Yatir, Socha, Dana, Kiryas Sana, which is also Devir. So it's interesting. So this is the third name. Devir was called Kiryat Sefer, and here it's called Kiryat Sana, Sorichiyim. Anaf, Eshtamo, Onim, Goshen. Interesting, we had this before. Although Goshen is normally connected with the part of Mitzrayim where the Jews were, here Goshen is a chelek of Eretz Yisrael in the south. Cholon, Gilo, again not the same as today. Arim Achas Esrei v'chatzreihem, 11 cities in the mountainous areas. Then we have another region of the mountainous areas. Arav, Duma, V'yashan, V'yanum, Ubeis Tapuach, V'afeka, V'chumta, V'kiryas Arba, Hi Chevron, which is actually in a mountainous area, although that was given to Kalev. Sior, Arim, Teisha, V'chatzreihem, another 9 for the mountainous areas. Ma'on, Carmel, V'zif, V'yuta, V'yisrael, V'yokdam, V'zanoach, Hakayin, Giva, V'simna, Arim, Eser, V'chatzreihem. Again, another 10 for the mountainous areas. Chalchul, Beisur, Ugdor, Ma'aras, Beis Anus, El Tekain, Arim, Sheish, V'chatzreihem, Kiryat Baal, Kiryat Yarim, Haraba, Arim, Shtayim, V'chatzreihem. All right, so again, these are, again, I apologize for not being able to identify these cities, but geographically, we have done the Negev, we have done the Shvela, we have done the Har, and then the final geographical area is Midbar. This is the desert outside of Jerusalem. Beiso Arava, Midin, Uschacha, V'hanivshan, V'ir HaMelech, V'yein Gedi, Orim Shesh, V'chatzreihem. And then Yerushalayim is included in a Midbar city, but then it mentions the following very important comment. This is the end of the perek. V'yes ha-Yevusi Yoshvei Yerushalayim. The Yevusi, which are one of the 7 nations who dwelt in Yerushalayim, although this belongs partially to Yehuda, the south, Gei Ben Hinnom, and partially to Binyamin, as we will see, but the Yevusi were not able to be expelled. V'yeshev ha-Yevusi es b'nei Yehuda b'Yerushalayim. And the Jebusites continued to occupy Yerushalayim, even though it belonged to Yehuda, ad hayom hazeh, till the day this book was written, until the period of actually David HaMelech. Rashi brings a very, very important comment. Rashi says that militarily we could have expelled the Yevusi. But the Yevusi that were living in Yerushalayim were descendants of Abimelech, the Philistine king. And Avram had made a covenant that he would not wage war with Abimelech, and that included him and his grandson and his great-grandson, meaning until the 4th generation. And those great-grandchildren were still alive. And therefore, until they died, we were not permitted to wage war because of that bris. Chazal consider that to have been a bit of a sin on the part of Avram, but similar to Yehoshua not being able to kill the Givonim because of that promise, we could not conquer Yerushalayim because of the bris that Avram Avinu made with Avimelech. So this is a very, very long perek, and this is the end of Perek Tesvav, the Gavul of Bnei Yehuda.